The rain hammered the windshield like accusations that would never stop. Isabella Harrington gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned bone white, the old sedan groaning and fishtailing as she pushed it harder down the twisting mountain road. In the rear-view mirror, the black SUV's headlights sliced through the storm like twin blades, closing the gap with every heartbeat. She knew exactly who was behind the wheel, her own blood, her own brother's. Jack's voice still burned in her ears from the frantic phone call 20 minutes earlier, cold and mocking. "You can't run forever, little sister. We buried you once. We'll finish the job tonight." Isabella's heart slammed against her ribs like a caged animal. 6 months ago she had been the forgotten daughter, erased from every family portrait and every legal document. Tonight she was something far more dangerous, the hunter. But first she had to survive the next 10 minutes because the road ahead was slick with rain and old lies, and the cabin waiting at the end of it held secrets that could either save her or destroy her completely. Her mind flashed back 6 months to the night the world ended in the Harrington mansion. The oak-paneled library smelled of lilies wilting in crystal vases and the sharp metallic tang of old money mixed with fresh betrayal. Isabella stood there in a simple black dress that suddenly felt like mourning clothes for her own life. At 28, she still carried the ghost of the awkward teenage girl who was never invited into the official family photos. Victor Harrington, her father, had died in his sleep, or so the official story went. Isabella had been the one to find him, slumped over his mahogany desk, skin already cold, eyes half open as if staring at some final regret. Jack, 35, tall and impeccably polished in his charcoal suit, had placed a heavy hand on her shoulder, his touch like ice wrapped in velvet. "Stay strong, Bella. We're all in this together now." His voice was smooth, the same tone he used to close billion-dollar deals while hiding bodies beneath the boardroom table. Robert, 32, lounged against the marble fireplace, swirling a glass of aged brandy, his smile sharp and never quite reaching his calculating eyes. "Dad would have wanted us united today. Family first, right?" The words dripped with false warmth. Isabella nodded numbly, but something felt violently wrong. Victor had been healthy, vibrant, even in his late 60s. Full of quiet plans and late-night talks with her about cleaning up the company's darker dealings. He had hinted more than once that changes were coming to the will, changes that would shield her from her brother's growing greed. Now he was gone, and the air in the library tasted like poison. The family lawyer, Gregory Lang, an old golfing partner of Victor's, cleared his throat and opened the thick document with trembling hands. His voice stayed professionally flat. "To my sons, Jack and Robert Harrington, I leave the entirety of the Harrington Empire, Harrington Global and all its subsidiaries, the real estate holdings and liquid assets totaling approximately $2.8 billion. Isabella waited, pulse thundering in her ears. Her name had to come next. She had quietly managed the charitable foundations, questioned the suspicious offshore transfers, and been the only one who still remembered the father who once read her stories in the mountain cabin. But Gregory kept reading, skipping over her as if she were a footnote that had been deliberately deleted. Then the hammer fell with clinical precision. "Regarding my daughter, Isabella Harrington, attached medical reports from Dr. Ellis confirm a long-standing diagnosis of delusional paranoia and emotional instability. She is to receive no inheritance whatsoever, and a trust has been established for her ongoing care under the full supervision of her brothers." The room tilted violently. Isabella's voice cracked out in a broken whisper. "What medical reports? I've never seen Dr. Ellis in my life. Dad never mentioned any of this." Jack sighed theatrically, playing the weary older brother for the lawyer and the 2 silent security guards waiting by the door. "Bella, we found the files in Dad's private safe weeks ago. The breakdowns, the wild accusations against us and the company. We tried to protect you, but he knew the truth. You're not well, sis. This is for your own good." Robert stepped closer, voice soft and laced with mock sympathy that made her skin crawl. "It's family, Bella. We love you. This way you'll finally get the help you need without embarrassing the Harrington name any further." Before she could scream the truth, that she had uncovered their money laundering pipelines funneling millions through shell companies in the Caymans, their bribes to regulators, their willingness to destroy anyone who stood in the way, the heavy oak doors opened wider. 2 security guards she had known since she was a child entered carrying a crisp court order. "Ma'am, we have to take you in. Willow Creek Psychiatric Facility. Everything is legal and court approved." Cold metal handcuffs clicked around her wrists, biting into her skin. As they dragged her toward the waiting black car, Jack leaned in so close his breath brushed her ear, voice dropping to a venomous whisper only she could hear. "You should have stayed quiet about the accounts, Bella. Now you're just the crazy sister no one will ever miss. Enjoy your new home, and forget everything you think you know." The last image seared into her memory forever, the grand family portrait hanging above the fireplace, Victor smiling proudly between his two perfect sons. Isabella had been airbrushed out years earlier, the forgotten daughter even while she still lived under the same roof. They didn't send her to a public prison where questions might be asked. Willow Creek was a private nightmare nestled deep in the remote pine-covered mountains, a so-called luxury facility where the ultra-wealthy discreetly disposed of inconvenient relatives. For 3 brutal months, Isabella screamed the truth at blank-faced doctors and over-medicated nurses. Every mention of forged signatures, murdered father, or billions in dirty money earned her higher doses of sedatives and stronger restraints. The charts filled with neat lies: delusional disorder triggered by grief, paranoid schizophrenia, potential danger to self and others. Jack visited once a month like clockwork, always carrying expensive flowers and shedding perfect crocodile tears for the security cameras mounted in every corner. "We're doing everything we can for you, sis. Get better soon. The family misses you." His eyes promised something far darker when the cameras turned away. The breaking point arrived on a storm-lashed night when Isabella lay strapped to her narrow bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling and quietly deciding it might be easier to stop fighting altogether. That was when a crumpled scrap of paper slid under her locked door from an unseen hand, perhaps the sympathetic janitor who had once worked for her father, or someone still loyal to the old Victor. The note was short, written in shaky block letters. "They killed Victor. The real will and proof are hidden in the safe behind the old portrait in the mountain cabin. Run tonight. The power will fail at exactly 2:17 a.m. Destroy this note. A friend who still remembers the real Harrington." Her heart exploded into frantic rhythm. At 2:17 on the dot, the entire facility plunged into blackness. Alarms began wailing, but Isabella was already moving. She had spent weeks loosening the metal leg of her bed frame in secret. With a savage swing, she smashed the reinforced window, glass slicing deep into her arms and shoulders as she climbed through the jagged opening. Barefoot and bleeding, she ran blindly through the freezing pine forest, branches whipping her face and tearing at her thin hospital gown. Distant sirens howled like hunting hounds behind her. By the cold gray light of dawn, she had hot-wired an old ranger truck from a deserted station and was speeding south, blood soaking the torn seat. A wildfire of pure rage igniting deep in her chest where fear had lived for too long. She cut her long auburn hair short in a filthy gas station bathroom, dyed it jet black with a cheap kit, and burned every scrap of her old identification. From that moment forward, she became Leila Voss, a ghost with a meticulously constructed digital footprint courtesy of Lena, an old hacker who had owed Victor a massive favor years earlier for pulling her out of legal trouble. For the next 6 months, Isabella lived in the shadows, cheap motels that smelled of mildew and regret, under-the-table waitressing jobs, scraping together every dollar while constantly checking over her shoulder. Every stranger on the street might be one of Jack's private investigators. Every late-night noise in the hallway could be Robert's hired muscle coming to finish what the psychiatric facility had started. The paranoia kept her razor sharp. She trained herself in cheap gyms and online tutorials, basic self-defense, evasion tactics, how to disappear in plain sight. During the long, empty hours, she studied her brother's empires online, mapping their weaknesses like a general planning a siege. Survival alone was no longer enough. True revenge required weapons, allies, and a plan so elegant and cruel it would make Jack and Robert feel every second of the isolation and powerlessness they had forced upon her. She reached out to Marcus Reed, a disgraced ex-detective with his own burned bridges inside corrupt law enforcement circles and a deep-seated grudge against billionaire families who thought rules were for lesser people. They met in a rain-soaked, abandoned warehouse on the industrial outskirts of the city, water dripping steadily through holes in the corrugated roof. Marcus, tall and broad-shouldered, with jagged scars across one cheek and eyes like winter steel, crossed his arms and regarded her with open skepticism. "You're asking me to help tear down 2 of the most connected men in the country, Lila." Why the hell should I believe a single word coming out of your mouth? Isabella slid an encrypted USB drive across the rickety metal table between them. Her voice stayed steady despite the storm raging outside and inside her. Because my brothers didn't just steal my inheritance and lock me away. They murdered my father to protect it, and I now have the proof they thought they buried with me in that hospital. Marcus plugged the drive into a battered laptop. The files loaded in silence, tampered bank statements routing millions through layered offshore entities, forged medical reports bearing her name but with impossible dates and signatures, and the most damning piece, a grainy audio recording captured secretly in Victor's study on the night he died. Jack's voice came through clear and calculating. If the old man changes the will one more time, we're finished. The offshore accounts are already under scrutiny. Robert's reply was eager, almost excited. Then he simply doesn't wake up tomorrow morning. We make it look natural. Heart attack. Easy. Marcus leaned back slowly, letting out a low whistle. Jesus Christ, this isn't just theft. This is patricide with $1 billion motive. Isabella met his gaze without flinching. I don't want their empire back the way it was. I want them to feel exactly what I felt. Forgotten, powerless, completely alone in the dark. Then I want them to watch every pillar of the life they built crumble while they're still alive to scream my real name. Marcus studied her for a long, heavy moment, the rain drumming louder on the roof. You're not chasing justice anymore, are you? You're chasing pain, the kind that breaks a man from the inside. She smiled then, thin and sharp enough to cut glass. Pain is the only language they ever taught me, and I turned out to be an excellent student. The plan began to take shape like a deadly, meticulously composed symphony. Phase 1 was simple yet devastating, become impossible to ignore without revealing herself too soon. Using every dollar she had scraped together and a risky high-interest loan arranged through Lena's underground network, Isabella quietly purchased a struggling cybersecurity startup on the verge of bankruptcy. She rebranded it overnight as Phoenix Dynamics and poured her limited resources into refining a revolutionary new security protocol, software perfectly tailored to the exact vulnerabilities in Harrington Global's client contracts. Within weeks, major accounts began shifting away from her brother's company. Jack's empire started bleeding money in public quarterly reports. Board members whispered in hallways. Stock prices twitched nervously downward. At the same time, she struck at the softer, more personal underbelly. Anonymous encrypted messages and carefully curated photographs began reaching Clara, Robert's glamorous but emotionally fragile wife. The images and recordings exposed Robert's string of affairs with models, assistants, and even one of Jack's own executives. Their picture-perfect marriage cracked wide open in vicious tabloid headlines and late-night screaming matches that Marcus captured through hidden devices. Robert grew increasingly paranoid, installing additional cameras throughout their mansion and lashing out at staff over the smallest mistakes. Jack, sensing the growing instability, started drinking heavily again, something he had managed to hide from the public for years. Isabella began attending high society charity galas in striking blood-red gowns, always on Marcus's steady arm. At her new short black hair and confident posture formed a perfect mask. Across crowded ballrooms, Jack and Robert would catch glimpses of her, their eyes narrowing with uneasy recognition. Those were the same eyes that had once watched them during tense family dinners years ago. But they couldn't prove it was their supposedly institutionalized sister. The doubt began eating at them like slow-acting acid, turning every shadow into a threat and every successful deal into a potential trap. The first major public strike landed like a precision bomb. Isabella anonymously leaked a short but crystal-clear video clip showing Jack in a private hotel suite paying off a notoriously corrupt judge, the very same judge who had signed the emergency commitment papers that sent her to Willow Creek. The footage exploded across social media and business news outlets within hours. Harrington Global's stock plunged 14% in a single trading day. Investors demanded answers. Internal investigations were quietly launched. That same night, her burner phone rang at 3:07 a.m. Jack's voice came through slurred with whiskey and raw rage. "Who the hell are you? What do you want from us?" Isabella whispered back through a voice modulator, calm and ice-cold. "The daughter you forgot, and I remember every single betrayal." She hung up before he could respond, her hands shaking with a mixture of triumph and lingering terror. But the deeper she dug with Lena's help, The more fragments of a much larger and more disturbing family secret began to surface, fragments that would soon shatter everything Isabella thought she understood about her own bloodline. Lena's deep web searches uncovered old sealed medical files and encrypted emails between Victor and a private DNA testing lab dating back nearly 30 years. At first, they made no sense. Then one encrypted folder cracked open to reveal a paternity report. The results were unequivocal. Victor Harrington was not Isabella's biological father. The revelation hit her like a physical blow in the dim light of a cheap motel room. According to the report, her mother, Victor's late wife, Elena, had conceived Isabella during a brief but passionate affair with a man named Daniel Voss, a brilliant but penniless young engineer who had worked on one of Victor's early tech projects. Victor had discovered the affair and the pregnancy but chose to raise Isabella as his own to preserve the family image and avoid scandal. He had loved her fiercely in his quiet way, perhaps even more because she was not his by blood. But Jack and Robert had somehow learned the truth years earlier, probably through Victor's own private papers. The knowledge had twisted their resentment into something monstrous. They saw Isabella not just as a rival for inheritance but as living proof of their mother's betrayal and their father's weakness. In their minds, erasing her entirely would finally cleanse the family bloodline and secure their legacy as the only true Harrington heirs. This secret explains so much, why Victor had protected her so fiercely in his final months, why he had planned to rewrite the will so dramatically, and why Jack and Robert had been willing to commit murder and institutionalization rather than risk the truth leaking. It also planted a dangerous new seed of doubt in Isabella's mind. If Victor was not her father, then the empire she was fighting to destroy had never truly belonged to her bloodline anyway. Was she seeking justice for a stolen birthright, or was she simply becoming the very monster her brothers had always accused her of being? Marcus noticed the change in her during their next warehouse meeting. "You look like you've seen a ghost. What did Lena find?" Isabella hesitated, then told him everything, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus listened in silence, and then placed a surprisingly gentle hand on her shoulder. "Blood doesn't define family. What you do with the truth does. But if this gets out, your brothers won't just be fighting to protect money anymore. They'll be fighting for their entire identity." The revelation added a darker, more personal layer to her revenge. Every move she made now carried the weight of shattered illusions. The tension escalated rapidly in the following weeks. Robert hired additional bodyguards and began openly accusing Jack of sloppy mistakes that were actually Isabella's carefully orchestrated leaks. The brothers' old sibling rivalry flared into vicious shouting matches, some of which Marcus managed to record through newly planted devices. A terrifying near miss came when an unidentified car tried to run Isabella off a rainy highway late one night. She escaped only through Marcus's quick defensive driving lessons and pure adrenaline. Another attempt, a poisoned drink at a gala that nearly killed Clara instead when glasses were accidentally switched, left Isabella haunted by unintended collateral damage. Clara, shaken and furious at her husband's secrets, began quietly feeding small pieces of information to an anonymous contact she never realized was her husband's crazy sister-in-law. Paranoia became a living, breathing entity, stalking all of them. Jack's nightmares grew so vivid he started keeping a gun by his bed. Robert's temper exploded in public, alienating longtime allies and business partners. Isabella herself wrestled with sleepless nights, where she questioned whether her quest for vengeance was turning her into the unstable woman her forged medical files had claimed she was. Marcus's steady, no-nonsense presence became her only anchor. Their relationship deepened from wary alliance into something warmer and more complicated, though trust remained a fragile thing built on shared danger rather than easy affection. The storm finally broke on the night of the car chase. Jack and Robert, now united in desperation after connecting the final dots through a careless mistake in Lena's network, sent their most trusted men after her. Isabella's sedan screamed around rain-slicked corners as the black SUV rammed her rear bumper repeatedly. Metal shrieked. Glass cracked. She barely kept control. Taking the narrow exit toward the old family cabin, the one place filled with pure, untainted childhood memories of Victor reading her stories by the fire while her brothers were away at boarding school. The cabin they had never bothered to visit because it held no value to them. She skidded to a stop in front of the dark wooden structure, jumped out, and sprinted inside, barricading the heavy door with furniture as gunfire began shattering the windows. Heart pounding so hard she could taste blood, Isabella tore the faded family portrait off the wall and opened the hidden safe behind it. Inside lay the original will, dated only days before Victor's death, leaving the vast majority of the empire to her with a handwritten letter attached in her father's familiar scrawl. My sons have become monsters driven by greed and resentment over truths they were never meant to weaponize. Bella is the only one with a true heart, blood or not. Protect her from them at all costs. The empire was always meant to be a force for good, not a crown for tyrants. Tears streamed down her face as she held the documents up to her phone's camera and began recording a live video. Her voice rang out clear and steady despite the chaos outside. Jack, Robert, you tried to erase me because I wasn't your perfect blood, but the forgotten daughter remembers every lie, every betrayal, every drop of our father's blood you spilled. The whole world is watching now. She hit send, broadcasting the footage simultaneously to every major news outlet, their business partners, law enforcement tip lines, and the inner circles of their crumbling empire. The explosion that followed lit up the night. Robert's men had rigged the cabin with gasoline in a final desperate attempt to destroy both her and the evidence. Isabella slipped out the back door into the dense forest, watching from the tree line as flames consumed the structure that had once held her happiest memories. Sirens wailed closer. Police vehicles and federal agents swarmed the scene. Jack and Robert were dragged away in handcuffs, their faces illuminated by firelight and flashing blue and red lights, finally understanding the full depth of the sister they had tried so hard to forget. Yet the daughter who carried none of their blood had just burned their entire world to ash. In the weeks that followed, Harrington Global collapsed under the weight of federal investigations and public outrage. Jack faced decades behind bars for fraud, conspiracy, and murder. Robert attempted a desperate plea deal that only incriminated himself further when Clara provided additional testimony. Isabella reclaimed her legal name and what remained of the legacy, but she no longer saw it as hers by birthright. She began dismantling the corrupt structures piece by piece, donating significant portions to causes Victor had quietly supported, and rebuilding Phoenix Dynamics into something that might one day honor the man who had chosen to love her anyway. Standing on the balcony of the mansion that now legally belonged to her, with Marcus beside her and the city lights sparkling below like distant stars, Isabella whispered into the cool night air, "I thought I was fighting for what was stolen from me." Marcus slipped his arm around her waist. "You were fighting for the truth, and sometimes that's worth more than blood." She smiled softly, the old pain still present but no longer sharp enough to cut. The forgotten daughter had risen from the ashes, her voice finally loud, clear, and unbreakable. Yet even as victory settled around her, Isabella couldn't shake the lingering question the family secret had planted. If she wasn't a Harrington by blood, then who was she really becoming now that the mask had been ripped away? The answer, she suspected, it would only reveal itself in the battles still to come. The flames from the burning cabin painted the night sky in violent oranges and reds, casting long dancing shadows across the pine trees where Isabella crouched, breathing hard, the original will clutched against her chest like a fragile shield. Sirens wailed closer now, cutting through the crackle of fire and the distant shouts of Jack and Robert as federal agents and local police swarmed the scene. She watched from the safety of the tree line as her brothers were dragged away in handcuffs, their faces illuminated by flashing blue and red lights, Jack's expression a mask of stunned fury, Robert's twisted with raw panic. For the first time in months, a cold, satisfying smile touched Isabella's lips. The forgotten daughter had just set their world ablaze, and the whole country was about to watch it burn. But even as victory surged through her veins, the paternity secret Lena had uncovered gnawed at the edges of her triumph like acid. Victor Harrington was not her biological father. She was the product of her mother Elena's secret affair with Daniel Voss, a brilliant but penniless engineer from Victor's early days. The revelation reframed every memory, every protective glance Victor had ever given her, and every ounce of hatred her brothers had harbored. They hadn't just wanted the money. They had wanted to erase the living proof of their mother's betrayal and their father's quiet shame. Blood, it turned out, was the one thing that had never bound them together. And now Isabella wondered if her revenge was justice, or simply the next chapter in a cycle of lies. Marcus's truck appeared on the narrow dirt road moments later, headlights cutting through the smoke. He threw open the passenger door without a word. Isabella slipped inside, her arms still stinging from the glass cuts, her clothes reeking of gasoline and pine. As they sped away from the Inferno, Marcus glanced at her, his scarred face etched with concern. "You sent the video?" She nodded, voice hoarse. "Everything. The will, the letter, the audio of them planning Victor's murder. It's live now." Marcus gripped the wheel tighter. "Then it's only the beginning. The feds will tear Harrington Global apart by morning, but you look like someone who just lost more than she gained." Isabella stared out at the dark trees blurring past. The paternity report burned in her mind. She hadn't told Marcus the full depth yet. Only that Victor wasn't her father by blood. Sharing it felt like admitting she had been fighting for a shadow all along. "I thought reclaiming the empire would make me whole," she whispered. "Now I don't even know whose empire it was." The next weeks unfolded like a fever dream of controlled chaos. News outlets exploded with the story. Harrington heirs arrested in shocking family betrayal. Forgotten daughter emerges with explosive evidence. Stock prices for Harrington Global plummeted overnight. Board members resigned in droves. Federal agents raided offices in 3 cities, seizing servers and freezing accounts. Jack, the polished mastermind, sat stone-faced in his initial hearing, lawyers scrambling to build a defense around claims of fabricated evidence and his sister's long history of instability. Robert, always the more impulsive one, cracked faster. In a desperate bid for leniency, he tried to cut a plea deal, throwing Jack under the bus for the murder plot while painting himself as a reluctant participant. The strategy backfired spectacularly when Clara, Robert's soon-to-be ex-wife, stepped forward with her own recorded conversations and financial trails that implicated both brothers equally. Clara had been quietly feeding information to Isabella through anonymous channels ever since the poisoned drink incident at the gala. "I thought I married into power, she told Isabella during a secret midnight meeting in a nondescript motel on the city outskirts. "Instead, I married monsters. Use whatever I give you, just make sure they never touch our daughter." The alliance felt fragile, but necessary. Clara's insider details on hidden slush funds accelerated the collapse. Isabella legally reclaimed her name and what remained of the family assets under emergency court orders, but she moved through the Harrington mansion like a ghost in her own home. The grand halls echoed with memories that now felt tainted. She stood for hours in Victor's old study, staring at the spot where she had found his body, replaying the paternity revelation. Victor had known the truth and chosen to love her anyway, shielding her from Jack and Robert's growing resentment. He had rewritten the will, not out of blood obligation, but because he saw her as the only one with a conscience, the only one who questioned the dirty deals that had built their fortune. Yet the secret planted seeds of doubt that grew wilder each night. Was she entitled to any of this? Or was she simply continuing the cycle of theft her brothers had started? Sleep became elusive. Nightmares blended her mother's affair with images of Victor's cold face and her brother's smirking courtroom appearances. Marcus noticed the toll. He had taken up residence in one of the guest wings, acting as both protector and sounding board. Their bond had deepened in the shadows of danger, late-night strategy sessions turning into quiet conversations where he shared fragments of his own burned career, betrayed by corrupt superiors. One evening, as rain pattered against the tall windows, he found her on the balcony overlooking the city lights. "Blood doesn't make a family, Isabella. Choices do. Victor chose you. Now you get to choose what happens next." She leaned into his steady warmth for a moment. It the first real comfort she had allowed herself. But trust was still a fragile thing. She hadn't fully shared how the secret made her question if revenge was turning her into the very unstable woman her forged medical files had claimed. The revenge deepened with calculated precision. Using Phoenix Dynamics as her legitimate base, Isabella funneled resources into exposing the full network of Harrington Global's corruption. Lena worked around the clock from a secure location, cracking additional layers of offshore accounts and leaking them strategically to journalists. One by one, former allies of her brothers distanced themselves, politicians who had taken bribes, executives who had looked the other way. Jack's polished facade cracked in prison interviews, where he ranted about a conspiracy orchestrated by his delusional sister. Robert, isolated in his own cell after a failed suicide attempt, began sending frantic letters through lawyers begging for a meeting. "Bella, We can still fix this. There are things you don't know about Victor, about all of us." Isabella ignored most of them, but one letter contained a cryptic hint that sent her pulse racing, a reference to the real heir and a safety deposit box key taped inside the envelope. Paranoia surged. Was this another trap, or had her brothers hidden even deeper secrets? The moral struggle intensified as collateral damage mounted. An innocent mid-level accountant who had unknowingly processed some of the dirty transactions lost his job and faced scrutiny. Clara's young daughter began asking why Daddy wasn't coming home, her innocent questions cutting deeper than any courtroom testimony. Isabella found herself staring at old family photos late at night, tracing her mother's face and wondering about Daniel Voss, her biological father. Lena had begun a quiet search for him, but the trail went cold in Eastern Europe decades ago. "What if he's still alive?" Isabella asked Marcus one stormy afternoon. "What if confronting this secret drags more people into the fire?" Marcus didn't sugarcoat it. "Revenge has a price. The question is whether you're willing to pay it without becoming them." The doubt fueled sleepless nights, but it also sharpened her resolve. She wasn't just destroying her brothers, she was dismantling the toxic legacy Victor had tried to protect her from. A major escalation came 3 weeks after the arrests. Isabella was attending a low-profile meeting with federal prosecutors at a secure downtown office when the assassination attempt unfolded. As her armored SUV pulled away from the building, a black motorcycle weaved through traffic and opened fire with a silenced pistol. Bullets shattered the rear window, one grazing her shoulder in a hot streak of pain. The driver, Marcus's trusted former colleague, swerved violently, mounting the curb to escape. Chaos erupted, pedestrians screamed, horns blared, and the motorcycle rider vanished into an alley. Security footage later revealed the shooter was a hired mercenary with ties to one of Jack's remaining offshore contacts. The attack wasn't just retaliation. It carried a message delivered through a burner phone left at the scene. "Stop digging, or the real truth about your mother dies with you." Isabella's wound was superficial, stitched in a private clinic, but the psychological impact ran deeper. Jack and Robert were behind bars, yet their reach extended like invisible tentacles. Worse, the attack coincided with Lena's discovery of another layer to the family secret, one that twisted the knife even further. While tracing Daniel Voss, Lena uncovered sealed hospital records from the year of Isabella's birth. Elena hadn't simply had an affair. Victor had been sterile after a childhood illness, something he had hidden from the world. He had knowingly raised Isabella as his own. But the records hinted at something darker. Elena had been pressured into the affair by Victor himself as a way to secure an heir and maintain the family image. Whispers in old correspondence suggested Victor had arranged discreet meetings, viewing the pregnancy as a business necessity rather than a betrayal. The truth shattered Isabella's remaining illusions. Victor hadn't chosen love out of pure kindness. He had engineered her existence to preserve his legacy, then protected her later out of guilt. Jack and Robert had discovered fragments of this years earlier through Victor's private journals. Their hatred wasn't just about the affair, it stemmed from realizing their father had treated the family like pawns in a game of image and control. The real heir Robert mentioned in his letter? And it referred to a potential third sibling, a child Elena had conceived later with Victor's knowledge, but who had been stillborn. The secret had driven the brothers to desperation, fearing any exposure would unravel the carefully constructed Harrington myth. This new twist hit Isabella like a physical blow during a late-night session with Lena and Marcus in the mansion's reinforced safe room. "He used my mother like a vessel," she whispered, voice trembling with a mix of rage and grief, "and my brothers knew enough to hate me for existing in the first place." Marcus placed a hand over hers. "Then rewrite the ending. Don't let their secrets define you." But the revelation fueled fresh paranoia. If Victor had manipulated Elena, what other lies had shaped Isabella's life? She began questioning every memory, every kind word, and sleep brought nightmares of shadowy figures arranging her birth like a corporate merger. The moral line blurred further. Destroying her brothers now felt less like pure vengeance and more like burning down a house built in quicksand. Yet stopping wasn't an option. The mercenary attack proved they still had dangerous allies on the outside. Clara became a deeper ally in the aftermath, visiting the mansion under the guise of divorce proceedings. Over coffee in the sunlit conservatory, she revealed more. Robert had once drunkenly confessed that Jack had been the one to administer the drug that mimicked Victor's heart attack. while Robert had handled the forged medical reports for Isabella. "They always saw you as the threat because Victor favored you," Clara said quietly. "Not because of blood, but because you reminded him of the conscience he lost." The conversation ended with Clara handing over a flash drive containing Robert's private emails, correspondence hinting at one final hidden account in Switzerland that could tie everything together and ensure life sentences. But as Clara left, Isabella noticed a subtle hesitation in her eyes. Was the alliance genuine, or was Clara playing both sides for a better settlement? The brother versus brother conflict exploded publicly when leaked prison recordings surfaced online, courtesy of Lena's network. In the audio, Jack berated Robert for panicking and trying to flip, calling him the weak link who never deserved the name. Robert shot back, accusing Jack of masterminding the murder and the commitment scheme alone. The recordings went viral, fracturing whatever remaining support the brothers had. Public opinion turned vicious. Hashtags like #ForgottenDaughter and #HarringtonFall trended for days. Isabella watched the coverage from the mansion, a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness settling in her chest. The empire was crumbling, but the family secret had left her questioning if she had ever truly belonged anywhere. As part 2 built toward its own tense close, another threat emerged. A mysterious envelope arrived at the mansion gate, addressed to Lila Voss, her old alias. Inside was a single photograph, a young Daniel Voss holding a baby that looked strikingly like infant Isabella, with a note scrawled on the back. "He's closer than you think. Stop the leaks or the real father pays the price." Marcus immediately increased security, but the message confirmed Lena's trail wasn't entirely cold. Daniel Voss, or someone claiming to be connected, might still be alive, and the brothers' network was using him as leverage. Isabella stood in Victor's study that night, the paternity report and the new photo laid out on the desk like pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit cleanly. The forgotten daughter had exposed the lies, but the truths beneath them were proving far more dangerous. Revenge had given her power, yet it threatened to consume the last pieces of her identity. With federal trials looming and shadows closing in, she whispered to the empty room, "I started this to make them feel forgotten. Now I'm the one wondering if I was ever really here." Marcus appeared in the doorway, his presence a quiet anchor. "We keep moving forward, one truth at a time." But as thunder rumbled outside, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that the biggest betrayal was yet to come, not from her brothers, but from the bloodline she had never truly owned. The game had shifted from simple destruction to a deeper hunt for identity, and the stakes had just become personal in ways she could never have imagined. The mysterious envelope lay on the polished mahogany desk like a coiled snake, its edges slightly crumpled from the guard's nervous hands. Isabella stared at the photograph inside, a young Daniel Voss cradling an infant whose tiny face mirrored her own features with eerie precision, while the scrawled note on the back burned into her mind. "He's closer than you think. Stop the leaks or the real father pays the price." Thunder rumbled outside the mansion windows. Mirroring the storm churning in her chest, Marcus stood nearby, his scarred jaw tight, already barking orders into his phone for increased security sweeps. "This isn't Jack or Robert playing games from behind bars," he said, voice low and edged with warning. "Someone on the outside still has reach, and they know your weak spot now." Isabella's fingers trembled as she traced the photo. The family secret had already shattered her sense of self. Victor's sterility, the arranged affair, the stillborn sibling hint, but this felt like a loaded gun pressed to her temple. If Daniel Voss was alive and close, her pursuit of revenge wasn't just dismantling her brother's empire, it was risking the life of the one man who might hold the missing pieces of her true identity. She whispered into the heavy silence, "What if stopping now means they win anyway?" Marcus met her eyes, the unspoken fear hanging between them. Every leak she authorized could sign Daniel's death warrant, yet halting the flow of evidence might let Jack and Robert walk free on technicalities when the trials began in just weeks. The days that followed blurred into a high-wire act of paranoia and calculated moves. Federal prosecutors pushed for swift indictments, but whispers in legal circles suggested Jack's defense team was preparing a bombshell, claims that the audio recordings were deepfakes and that Isabella herself had forged the will out of inherited instability. Robert, isolated in protective custody after his suicide attempt, sent another frantic letter through back channels. This one containing coordinates to a remote storage unit and a single line. Open it before the trial or the real heir disappears forever. Isabella's heart raced as she read it in the dim light of the safe room, Lena's encrypted video call flickering on the screen beside her. This could be a trap, Lena warned, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards in her hidden bunker. Or it could be Robert turning on Jack for real this time. Fear makes people sloppy. The ticking clock pressed harder. The main trial was set to open in 18 days, and every hour brought new leaks from Phoenix Dynamics exposing layered corruption. Yet the threat to Daniel Voss loomed like a shadow at every corner. Lena's deep web traces had narrowed his location to a quiet suburb 2 hours away, but recent activity showed encrypted payments funneled through the same offshore channels her brothers once controlled. Someone was watching him. Someone was waiting for Isabella to slip. Clara's next visit to the mansion carried an undercurrent of unease that only heightened the suspense. They met in the sunlit conservatory again, surrounded by blooming orchids that Victor had once tended, but Clara's usual composure cracked when she slid a fresh flash drive across the glass table. Robert called me from the facility last night. Collect, of course. He sounded terrified, not angry, said Jack has a contingency plan involving an old associate who handles problems permanently. Clara's hands shook as she poured tea, her eyes darting toward the windows as if expecting watchers. He begged me to tell you the storage unit holds proof that Jack acted alone on the murder, but he also mentioned something about your mother. A letter Elena wrote before she died, admitting Victor forced the entire arrangement. Isabella leaned forward, pulse quickening. Forced how? Clara hesitated, the silence stretching just long enough to twist the knife. Not just the affair. Elena tried to leave once, pregnant with you. Victor threatened to ruin Daniel Voss completely unless she stayed and played the perfect wife. The stillborn child later, Robert hinted it wasn't natural, complications Victor covered up to keep the family image intact. The revelation landed like a blow. Victor hadn't merely engineered her birth for an heir. He had trapped her mother in a web of control that extended to threats and possible medical interference. Isabella's vision blurred with a mix of rage and nausea. If true, her entire existence was built on coercion, and her brother's hatred stemmed from knowing their father had treated the family like disposable assets. "Why tell me now?" she asked, voice barely steady. Clara's smile was thin and haunted. "Because if Robert is flipping, I want out clean. And because I'm starting to believe you're the only one who can end this without more bodies." As Clara left under heavy escort, Isabella caught a fleeting glance, Clara checking her phone with a nervous flicker. Was the alliance cracking, or was Clara playing a longer game for custody leverage? That night, the suspense ratcheted tighter when Marcus insisted on personally checking the storage unit coordinates Robert had provided. Isabella refused to stay behind, her need for answers overriding caution. They drove through pouring rain in an unmarked vehicle, headlights cutting narrow paths through deserted back roads. The unit was in an anonymous self-storage complex on the city's edge, its rolling door creaking open under Marcus's practiced hand. Inside, dust-covered boxes yielded treasure and terror, hard drives with unaltered financial trails proving Jack's direct orders for Victor's fatal injection, plus a yellowed envelope containing Elena's handwritten letter. The words spilled out in elegant script, confirming every dark hint. Victor's sterility, the pressured affair, threats to expose Daniel's minor past legal troubles unless Elena complied, and her desperate plea for forgiveness to the daughter she could never fully claim. "I named you Isabella, hoping strength would carry you through the lies I helped create," Elena had written. Tears stung Isabella's eyes as she read, but the real hook came in the final paragraph, a mention of a second child, not stillborn as rumored, but secretly placed for adoption to hide further complications from the forced pregnancies. "There may be another out there, your half-sibling by blood, free of Victor's shadow. Find them before the monsters do." The discovery electrified the air with possibility and dread. A living half-sibling? Someone who shared Elena's blood without the Harrington poison? Lena's fingers flew when they relayed the details via secure line, but her voice carried fresh warning. Cross-referencing adoption records just pinged an alert. Someone else is searching the same databases, using Jack's old access codes from prison. The rival hunt had begun. Marcus gripped the wheel harder on the drive back, rain lashing the windshield like accusatory fingers. This changes everything. If Jack or his outside allies find this sibling first, they could use them as leverage, or eliminate them to tie up loose ends. Isabella's mind raced with worst-case scenarios. A stranger with her eyes suddenly dragged into the nightmare, or worse, already compromised and feeding information back to her brothers. The moral weight pressed heavier now. Her revenge wasn't just personal, it risked innocent lives tied to the same web of secrets. Sleep evaded her that night, replaced by visions of shadowy figures closing in on an unknown face that looked too much like her own. The assassination attempt's shadow lingered too, manifesting in subtle ways that kept the tension unrelenting. Security footage from the mansion perimeter showed a lone figure in dark clothing probing the fences 2 nights later, vanishing before guards could close in. A poisoned bouquet arrived at Clara's temporary residence the following morning, flowers identical to those Jack once sent Isabella in the psychiatric facility, with a card reading, "Secrets kill faster than bullets." Clara called in a panic, her voice cracking over the line. "They know I'm talking to you. Robert just warned me from inside. Jack has a guard on his payroll who smuggles messages." The call dropped abruptly, leaving Isabella staring at dead air, heart hammering. Was Clara safe, or had the alliance just become a liability? Marcus doubled patrols and pulled in more trusted ex-colleagues, but the invisible noose tightened. Every creak in the old mansion halls now sounded like footsteps. Every unknown number on her secure phone promised disaster. Courtroom preparations added another layer of ticking clock pressure. Prosecutors wanted Isabella to testify early, her live account of the commitment, the escape, and the cabin confrontation serving as the emotional core of the case. But Jack's lawyers filed motions claiming coercion and mental instability, demanding access to her medical history, the very forged files her brothers had created. During a tense strategy meeting with the legal team, one prosecutor pulled her aside, voice grave. "We've intercepted chatter. If you take the stand, there's credible intel that an attempt will be made in the courthouse itself. A sniper, a bomb threat, something public to discredit the whole narrative as a family meltdown." The warning hung heavy. Testifying could end the brothers for good, but it might cost her life or expose the Daniel Voss threat on national television. Isabella paced the study that evening. The Elena letter spread before her like a map to damnation. "I started this to make them feel forgotten," she told Marcus, voice raw. "Now I'm the one drowning in truths I never asked for. What if testifying drags the half-sibling into the spotlight too soon?" Marcus pulled her close, his steady heartbeat a rare anchor amid the chaos. Their connection had grown into something deeper, quiet touches, shared silences, but even that carried risk. If her enemies saw him as weakness, they would strike there next. The biggest twist detonated 3 days before the trial opened, shattering the fragile progress. Lena's urgent call came at 2 a.m., her face pale on the encrypted feed. "I found Daniel Voss. He's alive, living under a different name in a small town nearby, working as a mechanic, but there's more. He's been in contact with someone for weeks. I traced the messages. They're from Clara." Isabella's blood ran cold. Clara, the fragile ally, the betrayed wife, had been feeding information not just to her, but potentially playing both sides. Lena continued, voice urgent. "Clara's been sending him updates on your moves, framing it as protection, but one message mentioned securing the bloodline and a large payment routing through Robert's hidden account. She might be trying to deliver the half-sibling or Daniel himself to the highest bidder for a better divorce settlement or immunity." The betrayal stung like fresh glass in old wounds. Clara's hesitation during their last meeting, the nervous phone checks, it all clicked into horrifying focus. Marcus was already moving, grabbing keys. "We go to Voss tonight, quietly, before Clara or Jack's people make their move." The drive stretched into an eternity of rain-slicked roads and racing thoughts. What if Daniel rejected her? What if he was already compromised? What if the half-sibling was closer than imagined, perhaps even someone she had crossed paths with unknowingly? They arrived at the modest house under cover of pre-dawn gloom, Marcus circling the block first, while Isabella waited in shadow. A single light burned in the garage. Daniel Voss, older now, gray threading his hair but with the same sharp eyes from the old photo, emerged wiping grease from his hands, freezing when he saw her step into the light. Recognition dawned slowly, then all at once. You look like her, like Elena." his voice cracked with decades of buried pain. Before Isabella could speak, headlights swept the street, Clara's car pulling up fast, her face pale behind the wheel. She stepped out, hands raised in a gesture of surrender that felt anything but safe. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. Robert promised me protection for my daughter if I delivered proof of the second child, but I changed my mind when I realized Jack plans to eliminate all loose ends, including Daniel and the sibling, to weaken your testimony." The confession spilled out in rushed whispers, but Isabella's trust had fractured. "Why should I believe you now?" Clara's eyes darted to the approaching dawn. "Because the half-sibling isn't a stranger. It's Lena, the hacker. She was adopted out quietly after the stillbirth cover-up. Elena's final secret, and Jack just found out. He has people heading to her location right now." The hook slammed home with brutal force. Lena, her closest digital ally, the one who had built her new identity, was blood. The revelation reframed every late-night call, every risk Lena had taken, but there was no time to process. Marcus's phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Lena's bunker security had been breached. Distant sirens wailed as they raced back toward the city, Isabella's mind reeling through layers of deception. Clara rode with them under guard, her fate now tied to the unfolding chaos. Daniel insisted on coming too, his quiet determination a new variable in the deadly equation. "I failed your mother once," he said softly. "I won't fail you." The final approach to Lena's hidden location crackled with tension. Shadowy figures already moving near the perimeter, Jack's remaining mercenaries closing in for a pre-trial strike that could silence the hacker, the evidence, and the blood ties in one sweep. Isabella gripped the original will and Elena's letter like talismans as the vehicle sped closer. The forgotten daughter had uncovered truths that could heal or destroy her entirely. With the trial looming, allies fracturing, and enemies converging on the one person who shared her hidden blood, the question burned hotter than ever. Could she protect the fragile new family she had just discovered without losing herself to the same cycle of betrayal that had defined the old one? The rain intensified, washing the windshield in sheets, but the real storm waited inside the bunker where Lena, her half-sister, fought for her life against shadows sent by the brothers who had tried to erase them both. Gunfire cracked through the pre-dawn air like thunderclaps from hell as Marcus slammed the vehicle to a stop behind a cluster of abandoned shipping containers near Lena's hidden bunker. Isabella's heart hammered so violently she could taste copper on her tongue. The perimeter lights flickered erratically, shadows of Jack's remaining mercenaries darting between trees and concrete barriers, their silenced weapons spitting death toward the reinforced door where Lena was trapped inside. "She's my half-sister," Isabella whispered, the words still raw and unbelievable even as she said them aloud. Daniel Voss sat rigid in the back seat beside a wide-eyed Clara, his mechanic's hands clenched into fists. "I never knew about the second child," he muttered, voice thick with decades of regret. "Elena protected that secret with her life." Marcus checked his own weapon, eyes scanning the chaos. "We move now or we lose her, and every scrap of evidence that ends this nightmare. Stay low. One wrong step and the trial becomes a funeral." The ticking clock pressed mercilessly. The federal courthouse would open its doors in less than 48 hours, and without Lena's final decrypted files or Isabella's testimony, Jack's lawyers could spin the entire case into a delusional sister's revenge fantasy. But the real hook, the one that twisted like a knife in Isabella's gut, was the possibility that Lena, blood or not, might already be compromised. Or worse, that one of their own allies had led the mercenaries straight here. They burst from the vehicle in a coordinated rush, Marcus taking point with military precision, while Isabella and Daniel flanked him, Clara trailing under strict orders to stay behind cover. Bullets whined past, one grazing a container with a metallic scream that made Isabella's skin crawl. A mercenary lunged from the darkness. Marcus dropped him with a single, efficient shot that echoed too loudly in the quiet industrial zone. "Go!" he barked. Isabella sprinted for the side entrance Lena had shown her once in a secure video tour, her mind flashing through every layer of betrayal that had led here. Victor's engineered lies, her brother's murderous greed, Clara's double game, and now this, Lena, the hacker who had rebuilt her from nothing, revealed as the stillborn child who had somehow survived the cover-up. The bunker door hung ajar, pry marks fresh on the steel. Inside, dim emergency lights cast bloody red glows across server racks and scattered papers. Lena crouched behind a reinforced desk, laptop clutched like a shield, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. "Bella, Isabella," she gasped, eyes widening at the sight of Daniel behind her. "They knew exactly where to hit. Someone sold us out from the inside." Before Isabella could respond, heavy footsteps thundered from the rear corridor. 2 more mercenaries emerged, weapons raised. But they hesitated when Clara stepped into the light, hands raised. "Stop! Jack promised me safety if I delivered the girl," Clara shouted, voice trembling but calculated. The confession landed like a grenade. Isabella spun, betrayal exploding fresh in her chest. "You led them here after everything?" Clara's eyes darted between them, desperate. "I had no choice. Robert swore it was only to negotiate immunity for my daughter, but they turned on me too. Jack wants all loose ends burned before the trial, including me." One mercenary sneered and raised his gun toward Lena. "Boss said the hacker talks too much." Time slowed. Isabella lunged forward without thinking, tackling the man's arm as the shot went wild, shattering a monitor in a shower of sparks. Marcus fired twice, dropping the second attacker, but the first grappled with Isabella, his elbow slamming into her ribs with bruising force. Pain flared white-hot, yet she held on, driven by the raw need to protect the sister she had only just discovered. Daniel surprised everyone by charging in, swinging a heavy wrench he'd grabbed from the floor, connecting with a sickening crack against the mercenary's skull. The man crumpled, and sudden silence fell except for ragged breathing. Lena scrambled up, pulling Isabella into a fierce, awkward embrace. "The files are safe. I uploaded everything to a dead man switch. If I don't check in every hour, it floods every news outlet and the prosecutor's office." Her voice cracked with emotion as she looked at Daniel. "You're him. The one Mom wrote about in the letter I decrypted last year." The family secret hung thick in the air, it binding them in a fragile new circle amid the blood and broken glass. But Clara's betrayal still poisoned the moment. "Why should we trust you now?" Isabella demanded, pushing her away. Clara sank to her knees, tears streaming. "Because Jack has one final play. He recorded a confession, his own, claiming Robert acted alone on the murder and that you, Isabella, were in on a scheme to fake your instability for inheritance. It's a lie, but if it airs before you testify, the jury will fracture, and he has a plant in the courthouse ready to release it." The hook dug deeper. The trial wasn't just about justice anymore. It was a battlefield where one leaked recording could erase everything Isabella had suffered and fought for. They extracted Lena quickly, loading servers and drives into the vehicle under Marcus's watchful eye, while sirens wailed faintly in the distance, local police finally responding to the gunfire. As they sped away toward the mansion, Isabella sat between her biological father and her half-sister, the weight of blood ties she had never asked for pressing down like lead. "Victor trapped your mother," Daniel said quietly during a lull in the rain-lashed drive. "I tried to run with her once, but he had connections everywhere. When she told me about the second pregnancy, the one they called stillborn, I begged her to leave for good. She refused, saying it would destroy you both." Lena's hand found Isabella's. "I was smuggled out by a sympathetic nurse, adopted under a different name. I only pieced it together when I started digging for you." The revelation should have brought closure, but it only amplified the suspense. If Lena was the real heir Robert had hinted at in his letters, then Jack's desperation made lethal sense. He would kill to keep the bloodline narrative clean and the fortune uncontested. Back at the mansion, the group barricaded themselves in the safe room as dawn broke gray and unforgiving. Marcus coordinated with federal contacts confirming the dead man switch files had already weakened Jack's defense. But the final twist came via a smuggled prison message delivered through a corrupt guard who had been flipped. Jack wanted a face-to-face meeting with Isabella before the trial, promising the one truth that changes everything in exchange for dropping the most damning evidence. "It's a trap," Marcus warned immediately. "He'll try to discredit you, or worse." Yet the hook was irresistible. Isabella stared at the note. The paternity secrets and Elena's letter spread before her like a map of shattered illusions. "I need to hear it. For me. For all of us." Against better judgment, arrangements were made for a secure video link from the prison, with prosecutors monitoring. The call connected in the late afternoon, Jack's face appearing on the screen, gaunt, unshaven, but with the same cold charisma that had once fooled boardrooms. Robert sat beside him in the split screen, looking broken and furious. "Hello, little sister," Jack drawled, voice dripping venom. Or should I say, little bastard. You've torn our world apart over blood that was never yours to claim. Isabella kept her voice steady despite the rage boiling inside. You murdered Victor. You locked me away. That's all that matters now. Jack laughed, a hollow sound. Victor wasn't murdered for the money alone. He was going to expose everything, the forced pregnancies, the stillborn cover-up, even how he paid off doctors to fake records. Robert and I stopped him to protect the family name, but here's the real twist you missed, Bella. He leaned closer to the camera, eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. Daniel Voss wasn't just your father. He was working for Victor the whole time, planted to seduce Elena and produce an heir when Victor couldn't. Your biological father was complicit in the trap. Ask him. The room froze. Daniel's face drained of color as he stepped into frame. That's a lie, he protested, but his voice wavered. Jack continued relentlessly. Check the old contracts. Voss signed agreements for consulting that included certain personal favors. He got paid handsomely to disappear afterward. You've been chasing revenge against the wrong monster's sister. We were cleaning up father's mess. Robert chimed in desperately. I tried to warn you in the letters. Jack dragged me into it all, but the blood on our hands started with Victor's games. The accusation hung like poison gas. Isabella felt the ground shift beneath her. The revenge she had built brick by bloody brick now rested on foundations of sand. Was Daniel truly innocent, or had he been another pawn? Lena's eyes widened in horror, her hacker instincts already racing to verify the claims against old digital trails. Marcus cut the feed abruptly, but the damage was done. Paranoia exploded anew. Clara, still under guard, broke down completely. I knew fragments. Robert bragged once about Voss being bought off. That's why I contacted him quietly, trying to broker safety for everyone. Betrayal layered upon betrayal until Isabella could barely breathe. She confronted Daniel in the hallway, voice shaking. Is it true? Did you sell my mother's life for money? Daniel sank against the wall, tears streaming. I loved her, but Victor had dirt on me, old debts, a mistake from my youth. He offered a way out if I facilitated things. I thought I was saving her from a worse fate. When she got pregnant with you, I begged to take you both away. He refused. The second child, Lena, was my chance at redemption, but they took her too. The confession shattered the last illusion. Isabella's revenge had targeted symptoms, not the disease. Victor's empire of control had poisoned everyone, including the man whose blood ran in her veins. The moral hook reached its breaking point that night. As federal agents arrived to escort Isabella to the courthouse under heavy guard, she made a choice that reframed everything. Instead of destroying the remaining Harrington assets in a final vengeful blaze, she instructed Lena to release a curated version of the files, one that exposed Victor's original sins alongside her brother's crimes. No more cycles, she told Marcus quietly as they prepared to leave. They tried to erase me. I won't erase the truth, even if it hurts. The drive to the courthouse crackled with tension. Protesters lined the streets, media helicopters thrummed overhead, and Jack's planted threat loomed like a sniper's scope. Inside the packed courtroom, Isabella took the stand, her voice steady as she laid bare every betrayal, every secret, including the paternity web and Daniel's reluctant role. Gasps rippled through the gallery when she revealed Lena as her half-sister and called Daniel to testify. Jack's defense crumbled under cross-examination when the dead man switch files dropped publicly mid-session, including the smuggled prison confession that backfired on him. Robert flipped fully on the stand, sobbing as he detailed Jack's direct order for the heart attack drug. But the ultimate twist came in the closing hours. Clara, granted immunity for her testimony, revealed one final card. She had secretly recorded Jack admitting Victor's sterility and the arranged affairs years earlier, using it as leverage for her own protection. The jury deliberated only 4 hours. Guilty verdicts landed like hammer blows. Jack for murder and conspiracy, life without parole. Robert for accessory and fraud, 25 years. The courtroom erupted, but Isabella felt only exhausted quiet as she stepped into the sunlight outside. In the weeks that followed, the empire fractured cleanly. Isabella, with Lena and Daniel at her side, dismantled the corrupt core of Harrington Global, redirecting funds to foundations that honored Elena's quiet struggles and Victor's few genuine good intentions. Marcus stayed, their bond deepening into something real and untainted by revenge. Yet the story refused a fairy tale close. Late one evening on the mansion balcony, Isabella received a final anonymous note, likely from a lingering associate. The game never ends when blood is involved. Watch your new family. She burned it, but the warning lingered like smoke. The forgotten daughter had risen, claimed her voice, and broken the cycle, but the secrets had taught her a hard truth. Revenge could free you, yet the shadows of family always followed. She looked out over the city lights with Lena beside her, Daniel's quiet presence in the background, and whispered, "We remember now, all of us." For the first time, the words felt like victory instead of vengeance, but in the thriller of her life, Isabella knew one truth above all: the forgotten could never truly forget. And that memory was the sharpest weapon of all. Months bled into seasons after the courtroom doors slammed shut on Jack and Robert Harrington's futures. The city skyline no longer felt like a battlefield to Isabella. It had become a quiet witness to her uneasy peace. She stood on the wide balcony of the mansion that now carried her name alone, the evening breeze carrying the faint scent of rain and distant traffic. Below, the lights of the financial district twinkled like scattered diamonds, many of them no longer tied to the corrupt empire her brothers had ruled with iron fists and whispered threats. Harrington Global had been dismantled with surgical precision. The clean divisions went to legitimate partners, the dirty offshore accounts frozen and redirected, and a significant portion funneled into new foundations bearing Elena's name: scholarships for women escaping controlling relationships, mental health initiatives for those labeled unstable by powerful men, and quiet support for families fractured by hidden paternities. Isabella had insisted on it, not as atonement for Victor's sins, but as a deliberate rewrite of the legacy that had tried to erase her. Lena sat beside her on the stone ledge, legs dangling over the edge with the casual fearlessness only a hacker who had survived a bunker shootout could possess. Her short hair had grown out a little, streaked now with subtle silver that caught the fading light. "You know, I ran the numbers again last night," Lena said, voice soft but edged with that familiar digital sharpness. "The Dead Man Switch files are still out there, archived in 3 continents. If anyone tries to resurrect even a sliver of the old Harrington machine, it triggers automatically. We built a ghost that never sleeps." Isabella smiled faintly, reaching over to squeeze her half-sister's hand. The revelation that Lena was the stillborn child Elena had fought to protect had forged a bond deeper than shared blood. They spent late nights together now, not plotting revenge, but decoding old journals, piecing together fragments of their mother's life from scattered letters and encrypted drives. Lena had even begun teaching Isabella basic coding, turning the forgotten daughter into someone who could protect her own digital shadow. "We're not erasing the past," Isabella replied. "We're just making sure it can't hunt us anymore." Daniel Voss visited often, though never without the quiet caution of a man who had once been bought and broken by Victor's web. He arrived that evening carrying a small wooden box, his mechanic's hands gentle as he set it on the table between them. Inside lay yellowed photographs, Elena smiling radiantly in a sunlit park, holding infant Isabella while a younger Daniel watched from the background with eyes full of conflicted love. "I kept these hidden for decades," he said, voice rough with regret that time had not fully softened. "After Victor paid me to disappear, I told myself it was protection, but I was a coward. I should have fought harder for both of you." The confession still carried sting, especially on nights when Isabella replayed Jack's prison video call in her mind, the accusation that Daniel had been complicit in the arranged affair. Yet she had chosen forgiveness, not for him, but for the version of herself that refused to let Victor's games define another generation. "You're here now," she told him, the words carrying the weight of hard-earned acceptance. "That's more than my brothers ever offered." Daniel nodded, eyes glistening, and for the first time since the bunker night he stayed for dinner, the 4 of them, Isabella, Lena, Daniel, and Marcus, sharing stories that mixed laughter with the occasional heavy silence. Marcus Reed had become a permanent fixture in the mansion, his scarred presence a steady anchor rather than a bodyguard. Their relationship had deepened slowly, built on shared scars rather than dramatic declarations. He still ran private security consulting from an office on the ground floor, but his real work now involved training women's shelters in self-defense and digital evasion, lessons drawn directly from Isabella's escape from Willow Creek. That evening he joined them on the balcony, sliding an arm around Isabella's waist as the sun dipped below the horizon. "The last of Jack's offshore contacts was picked up this morning," he murmured against her hair. Interpol finally closed the loop on the mercenary who fired at the courthouse steps. It's over, Bella. Truly. She leaned into him, allowing herself the rare luxury of believing it. Yet even in his embrace, a small shadow lingered. The anonymous note she had received weeks earlier, "The game never ends when blood is involved. Watch your new family," had been burned, but its words echoed in quiet moments. Jack and Robert were behind bars, but power like theirs had roots that stretched far beyond prison walls. Friends in high places, hidden accounts not yet uncovered, and the quiet resentment of those who had profited from the old empire. Isabella had learned that revenge was never a clean kill. It was a wound that could fester if left unchecked. Clara's fate had been one of the more bittersweet threads in the aftermath. Granted limited immunity for her testimony, she had relocated with her daughter to a quiet coastal town, far from the media glare and the Harrington name. Occasional encrypted messages arrived, updates on her daughter's school life, quiet thanks for the financial support Isabella had arranged through the Elena Foundation. But trust remained fractured. Isabella had never fully forgiven the double game Clara played in contacting Daniel, even if it had ultimately saved lives. "Some alliances are born in fire and never quite cool," Lena had said once, and Isabella carried that truth like a small scar. Robert had attempted one final plea from prison, a handwritten letter begging for a visit, claiming he had evidence of additional Victor-era crimes that could cleanse the family name. Isabella had read it once, then shredded it without reply. Her brothers had taught her the cost of listening to their voices. She would not make that mistake again. As night fully claimed the sky, the group moved inside to the warmly lit study where Victor's old portrait had once hung. Isabella had replaced it with a simple painting of Elena, commissioned from a description in Daniel's memories, standing strong against a stormy background, a single red thread symbolizing the unbreakable. If complicated, ties of blood and choice. They spoke of the future over coffee and quiet music. Lena planned to expand Phoenix Dynamics into open-source security tools for at-risk communities. Daniel talked of teaching mechanics to underprivileged youth, perhaps even reconnecting with distant relatives who had never known about his hidden chapter with Elena. Marcus proposed a trip, somewhere remote, away from cameras and court records, where they could simply breathe. Isabella listened, feeling the weight of the forgotten daughter lift slightly with each word. She was no longer running, no longer hiding behind aliases like Lila Voss. She was Isabella Harrington by choice now, not by forged documents or stolen birthrights. The empire she had reclaimed had been reshaped into something smaller, cleaner, and infinitely more human. Yet the epilogue of her story refused to close with perfect resolution. Late that night, after the others had retired, Isabella sat alone at Victor's old desk, the same one where she had found his body all those months ago. She opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the original will, the handwritten letter from Victor, and Elena's desperate confession. Reading them again under the soft lamplight, she traced the words that had upended her world: the forced affair, the threats, the stillborn cover-up that had hidden Lena's survival, Daniel's reluctant complicity. The family secret had not simply been about blood, it had been about control, about men who viewed women and children as pieces on a board. Isabella had broken that board, but fragments still remained, and a new encrypted message had arrived on her secure line earlier that evening from an unknown sender using one of Jack's old routing patterns. It contained only a single line and a blurred photo. "The third heir was never stillborn. There is another. Sleep well, sister." Her pulse quickened, the old paranoia stirring like embers under ash. Another sibling? A third thread in the tangled bloodline Victor had tried to weave? She deleted the message, but not before forwarding it to Lena with a note. "Check quietly. No one else." The game, it seemed, had not ended with handcuffs and guilty verdicts. Blood carried memories, and memories carried danger. Isabella stood, walking to the window to stare out at the sleeping city. She thought of the psychiatric facility's cold halls, the rain-slicked car chase, the burning cabin, the courtroom where she had finally spoken her truth. She had risen from erasure, turned pain into power, and forged a new family from the wreckage. But the forgotten daughter had learned the hardest lesson of all. Survival demanded vigilance. Love demanded trust tempered by scars. And revenge, once unleashed, left echoes that could call back from the darkest corners. Marcus appeared in the doorway, sensing her unrest as he always did. "Everything okay?" he asked, crossing to pull her close. Isabella nodded against his chest, breathing in the steady scent of him. "It will be," she whispered, "one truth at a time." They stood together in silence as the mansion settled around them, the old walls holding stories of betrayal and redemption in equal measure. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping against the glass like gentle accusations or perhaps quiet applause. Isabella closed her eyes, allowing a small, genuine smile to form. She was no longer the girl they had buried alive in lies and locked rooms. She was the woman who had dug herself out, who had burned the lies to ash, and who now guarded the fragile light that remained. In the end, the forgotten daughter had not just reclaimed her name, she had rewritten it, bold, unbreakable, and forever remembered. And though shadows might still whisper from the edges of her new life, Isabella Harrington walked forward into them unafraid, because she had already faced the monsters wearing her brothers' faces and emerged, carrying something far more dangerous than vengeance, the power to choose her own ending over and over again, for as long as blood and memory allowed. The rain fell harder, washing the city clean for another day. Somewhere in the distance, a new story was already beginning. Threads of hidden siblings, lingering allies, and the quiet strength of women who refused to be erased. But for tonight, in the warmth of chosen family and hard-won peace, Isabella let herself believe that the storm had finally passed, or at least that she had learned how to dance in it without breaking.